Ukraine entered 2024 with very little new equipment from the end of 2023. When new promises and equipment were made in the spring of 2024, the timescale for much of that equipment was not immediate relief, the exception being some of the U.S.'s earliest aid package deliveries in 2024, more specifically, Bradley's in use with the 47th Mechanized covering their withdrawal from Avdiivka, which were still sporting desert paint. Most other aid has taken a very long time in many deliveries mentioned in the spring combat. This equipment will either be entering combat in the winter of 2024 or throughout 2025. We will be specifically looking at ground combat vehicles because, as mentioned in the previous video, Ukraine is suffering a shortage of these systems, so their introduction will not only be noticeable, but also very necessary, as Ukraine is having to rely heavily on APCs, MRAPs, and IFVs in the assault role, as well as replacing mechanized brigades with infantry brigades. We will be looking specifically at main battle tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, armored fighting vehicles, and armored personnel carriers. Spanish Leopard 2A4s, co-financed by Germany for refurbishment, have been essential to replenishing the numbers of lost Leopard 2A4s in Ukrainian service throughout 2023 and 2024, with a total of 29 being sent. This platform represents the most numerous modern NATO MBT in Ukrainian service, and while modifications with domestic ERA are necessary to boost the survivability of these systems, they are without a doubt a strong improvement on T-Series MBTs already in Ukrainian service. By having the 33rd and the 155th both run Leopard 2A4s, Ukraine can rely on at least two brigades in late 2024 and 2025 to have armored battalions capable of punching back against larger quantities of Russian armor. This is, of course, still a really low number overall. Other modern MBTs like the Leopard 2A6, STRV-122, Challenger 2, and Abrams were not sustained, and limited numbers of these vehicles still make up small portions of armor in use by their brigade, which all have to rely on older vehicles to maintain full-strength armored battalions. 14 more Leopard 2A4s are to be purchased by a joint Dutch and Danish initiative from Germany, but this is marked on Oryx as to be delivered, would be likely used to sustain losses for these brigades throughout the coming year rather than any use in 2024 or early 2025. The 33rd Mechanized has released some, albeit low-quality footage of their use of Leopard 2A4s engaging Russian armor, utilizing its accuracy and ability to fire on the move to great effect. The 31 American-sent M1A1SA Abrams sent to Ukraine that encountered combat in late 2023, early 2024, have been at least halfway attrited after a year of combat. As 2024 turns over into 2025, Australia has announced they will refurbish and transfer 49 out of their 59 retired M1A1 Abrams and deliver those to Ukraine. This would give enough of a cushion of extra vehicles for the 47th Mechanized to run their 3 tank companies at full strength for the better part of 2025, keeping the brigade in the fight with its heavier elements to support its mechanized, assault, and infantry battalions, putting them in the best chance for high effectiveness. The M1A1, like all donated vehicles, had a troubled start with high losses early on, but after adaptation, and in the case of the Abrams, extensive modification, those losses slowed down to a more steady pace. It does not help how aggressively the 47th has been deployed for over a year of non-stop combat without rotation or break, only having the downtime to move from one hot zone to another. This practice has probably not helped morale or efforts for training, but has certainly emphasized that Ukraine has a high degree of confidence in the brigade they rely on so absolutely heavily. This American brigade will be able to be a thorn in Russia's side for another year, despite it being only around a single percentage of Ukraine's combat power in brigades. One of the oldest MBTs being sent to Ukraine, the Leopard 1A5, Dutch, German, and Danish Leopard 1A5s have been trickling into Ukraine since late 2023, where they first saw service in Kharkiv, resulting in one being damaged. More recently, in the Russian counteroffensive on Kharkiv, 2 more were destroyed, all of these variants in their original configuration. During the 21st Mechanized time in the village of Turney, shortly before making back some gains, they pictured themselves in use with an unmodified Leopard 1A5 and a Leopard 1A5 in camouflage. A little later, a front perspective image of a modified Leopard 1A5 was released with ERA covering the vehicle that was half covered in a tarp. The 21st Mechanized operates the most modern Leopards, originally the STRV-122, before also getting the remaining Leopard 2A6s to mitigate what had been heavy losses. The brigade might have 11 modern MBTs in service while fighting in Kursk. The mechanized brigades deployed in the 2023 counteroffensive usually operated 30 MBTs. At close to one-third strength now, the use of Leopard 1A5s to augment that force is a serious downgrading capability and likely representative of more downgrades to come. In September of 2024, the 5th Armored Tank Brigade revealed its main choice being the Leopard 1A5 plastered in ERA. The brigade also operates the M-55S, a modified T-55. This tank brigade will not be spearheading results and at best will have to send its battalions around to have armor support to brigades that do not have their own armor. Over 155 mobile 105mm rifled guns is no small thing, however, and these vehicles will be necessary to mitigate the tank shortages Ukraine is feeling while raising new brigades and trying to reinforce existing ones. One modified Leopard 1A5 was destroyed recently, as the ERA will not make these vehicles any more invincible than the thousands of T-Series MBTs that have been catastrophically destroyed throughout the year. They, however, do have great accuracy on the move and at longer ranges than the T-Series tanks. T-72s remain the most common donated tank to the Ukraine during the conflict. Derived from export variants in Warsaw Pact nations, these tanks can be all over the place in quality, downgrade, on par, or upgrade from the T-64BVs in Ukrainian service. At the T-72's core is a cheaper, simpler T-64. But there's been a long time for nations to swap out terrible engines and fire control systems. The 25 checked upgraded T-72As bought by Denmark for Ukrainian use will go a ways in keeping active tank units active, with a vehicle that is mostly familiar to Soviet-style vehicle crews and are compatible with domestic Ukrainian upgrades if time and resources allow. 30 Croatian M-84 domestic T-72s are to be delivered to Ukraine as part of a deal with Germany for a discount on their Leopard 2A8s that they are purchasing. They will need ERA upgrades in Ukraine, and their protection might be relative to the aforementioned T-72EA or other T-72s that have received improved FCS and their own composite armor. Moving on to IFVs and the M2 Bradley. In early 2024, the American aid flowed once more, and over 150 M2 Bradley IFVs began to arrive in Ukraine, replacing existing losses, which were high from intense combat in Zaporizhia, Avdiivka, and the retreat to Pokrovsk. Losing over 100 now of the 300 total being sent, half of these losses have a chance to be recoverable and repairable, and while only needing 100 active in order to operate a brigade that only started with 50 Bradleys, the M2 Bradley has proven itself a menace to the Russian army in its ability to threaten all Russian AFVs while performing IFV-related roles. While in theory Ukraine might have enough to begin equipping another brigade, all 300 of these will likely stay within the 47th in order to sustain losses throughout 2024 and 2025, given how unreliable U.S. aid looks in the future. Having recently been pulled from the front after a long year of straight combat in most areas, the 47th had a chance to catch its breath, rearm, retrain, and continue to be a major anchor in the Ukrainian lines where they were needed most, if that were what happened. Instead, they were redeployed directly to Kursk in the Gloskovo direction along with the 225th. If the proposed 59 Australian M1A1s are cleared, the 47th can continue to be a champion of American firepower in 2025 and then 2026. But the dwindling supply of Abrams and reoccurring issues with leadership are hampering the combat effectiveness of one of the most heavily armed Ukrainian brigades. Another part of the German deal with Croatia was the delivery of 30 M-80A IFVs. Slovenia had donated around 30 back in 2023, and with around 12 visually confirmed lost, the M-80 fleet had reached about half strength after a year of fighting. Replenished with many to spare, the lightly armored vehicle with a 20mm autocannon might continue to still prove a superior alternative to the BMP-1 or worse IFV options in Ukrainian service. With the BMP-2, Czechia delivered 25 unknown IFVs in February of 2024, according to Oryx. Ideally, that would be some of their BVP-2s, of which we have seen some in service with the 150th. We also know that 35 of the 80 BMP-2s Denmark wants to supply Ukraine with are from the Czech Republic. The BVP-2 is simply a Czech domestically produced BMP-2, an increasingly rarer IFV in the war, and while certainly one condemned for its powder keg nature, is preferable to a lot of Soviet alternatives replacing it, namely the BMP-1 and MTLB. Better protected than both, the BMP-2 has superior firepower and a 30mm autocannon instead of a low-pressure 73mm gun. The 150th Mechanized has been equipped with these IFVs, and there are plenty of losses these IFVs can try to replace. The number is also an appreciable amount. While not canceling out losses, it does make a dent, considering the small size of Denmark, and their continuous appearance and aid has to be noted as a reliable ally carrying its weight. The fabled CV-90 IFV of Ukraine claims began as early as 2022 and proposed aid for Ukraine with the idea that the CV-90 would become the next Ukrainian IFV. This claim has been repeated year after year. A grand sum of 50 CV-90 40Cs over the course of the entire war have been delivered. Half a mechanized brigade's worth of IFVs, likewise for their low number and deployment to lower intensity areas in Ukraine. The IFV has had lower losses. While potentially better than the M2A2 ODS Bradley, the constant deliberation of who, what, when, and where for the CV-90 has kept it sidelined when it was needed most as an interesting, albeit operationally insignificant force. Talks of Dutch, Danish, and Swedish efforts to produce 230 CV-90 35NLs for Ukraine have yielded claims of 35 being promised in 2024 with no delivery date. The CV-90 35NLs, if delivered, would likely be Ukraine's strongest IFV. If 230 were delivered, there would be possibly two very well-equipped mechanized brigades. Given major operations rely on numbers more akin to 20,000 men rather than 4,000, it would not be strategically decisive, but it would provide Ukraine alternatives from half-dozen or so brigades they have leaned on very heavily in 2023 and 2024. Using the same ammunition as the Gepard, the 35mm cannon would not be a brand new ammunition to Ukraine without precedent. There are a laundry list of reasons for the CV-90-35, the shared ammunition, the upgrade in firepower, the upgrade in protection, the great off-road performance, which makes it all the more heartbreaking to see that despite claims, deliberations, and promises, this is only hypothetically an IFV that Ukraine might field, perhaps even after a Lynx is delivered to Ukraine. Along the same time, Europe was in concert about making claims of sending equipment. After the U.S. declared their $60 billion budget for aid, Germany floated around the idea of sending Boxer APCs to Ukraine with the implication of them being the 30mm cannon variants. This was never mentioned again and forgotten into the void. This will, however, come up again later. The Martyr IFVs have slowly trickled into Ukraine in modest amounts over the course of 2023 and 2024, with allegedly there being over 140 and maybe as many as 200 1A3 variants sent to Ukraine. Around 33 have already been lost after over a year of fighting. Deployed with more defensive brigades like the 82nd, they have a limited amount of content online for study, most of which comes from their invasion of Kursk, where they supplied heavier IFV support to relatively motorized forces relying on MRAPs, IMVs, and BTRs, with a supporting number of T-64s and PT-91s, along with the remaining Challenger 2s following far behind. The Martyr 1A3 is not a great or modern IFV, but it still represents an improvement over the BMP-1, the most common IFV in Ukrainian service. It's well protected, and its 20mm cannon, while unstabilized, can destroy any Soviet light armor with enough hits, giving it a fighting chance. It's unknown how many more to the trickle Ukraine will receive, if they do receive any more, as Germany does not include any in their later 2024 declared aid package. Bordering on the tier of Vaporwave, Rheinmetall's Lynx IFV only recently began production at scale in Hungary this year. Ambitious Rheinmetall plans wanted to put the first units of this IFV in Ukraine by December of 2024, with 10 units delivered, and have production and support for the IFV in country by 2025. This would be the newest IFV supplied to Ukraine and is definitely cutting-edge, untested kit. It is a large vehicle and is easily the most protected IFV discussed. It is equipped with a 30mm cannon, like the KTO Rosomek, which Ukraine already operates in decent numbers. It is lightly better protected than the Leopard 1A5s in Ukrainian service, as well, with the vehicle sitting at about the same weight. Indeed, the vehicle is in a similar weight class to a Soviet MBT, but equipped with a 30mm gun in its ammunition instead of a 125mm gun in its ammunition. The Lynx production was confirmed to begin in late 2024 with Ukrainian partnership back in June, but it is unknown how much of that is still being done in Hungary. The annual production goal of the AFV plant in Ukraine is 400 vehicles per year, but the question is unknown as to whether they mean Lynx IFVs, Fuchs APCs, which were supposed to be produced first, but has seemingly been sidelined or delayed, meaning Lynx production in country would be delayed for another year if they went with the Fuchs first, or if it's a mix of both of these IFVs at the same time. And while the first may reach Ukrainian soil in 2024, this, like the CV9035, is looking to be a 2025 or later vehicle for Ukraine. 64 decommissioned LAV-2 Coyote reconnaissance vehicle hulls were delivered from Canada to Ukraine to serve mostly as spare parts, likely for the LAV 6.0 ASCVs in Ukrainian service, as well as the American Strikers, or as spare parts for a batch of LAV-2s that are supposed to be refurbished in Canada and sent to Ukraine. But Canadian failures have left the company with nothing to do as Ukrainians fight, and these hulls collect dust. Not a particularly large, heavily armored, uniquely armed, or expensive system, the LAV should not have been this difficult to get a hold of for Ukraine. It's more akin to a BTR-82 than a proper IFV. It has 14.5mm protection at best and sports a 25mm Bushmaster that has served Ukraine well on the Bradley. It could have been an excellent system for high-speed push into Kursk by bringing an autocannon where other vehicles only had heavy machine guns. It could have taken off some of the stress taken on by less protected but more heavily armed Ukrainian BTR-4s that suffered heavy losses in their eastward push from Sudza. And if Ukraine can cobble together 10 LAVs out of the 64, it would be impressive, surprising, but fundamentally not worth the effort. It might suffice for Canada to call this their Army's IFV, but a near-peer war would put it in the APC category where it belongs without too much effort. Moving on to AFVs in general, these vehicles don't necessarily fit in any niche categories like APCs, IFVs, and the like, so we're going to start with the AMX-10RC. The Ukrainian AFV Kiev Brigade, also referred to as the 155th, is currently in French training and will be equipped with 18 AMX-10RCs as fire support. As shown in 2023, these systems are not great at heavy fire support, breaching, tank destroying, reconnaissance. They don't have the armor, the firepower, or the fire on the move capability to do much more than light fire support. In that role, however, they have served Ukraine's Marines since 2023, with only taking the 4 initial losses out of the 40 that they've had since February of 2024. The AMX-10RC's 105mm gun is not as potent as the L7 105mm rifled gun on the Leopard 1A5 and M-55S, so it's less accurate, has lower velocity, ammunition at its disposal. It is also unstabilized, meaning it cannot fire on the move, reducing its effective mobility. Its armor is very light in order to let the vehicle be amphibious, so its resistance to drones, artillery fragments, and autocannon fire is lacking, and its wheels leave it vulnerable to being crippled. All this being said, the vehicle will be better at the fire support role than BRDM-2s, which continue to be in Ukrainian service, and as a reminder, that applies to all of these older systems that would have been insufficient in 2023. Russia has seriously downgraded the capabilities of a large number of their units. They still operate more armor, but they deploy a lot of infantry on foot, scooters, motorbikes, on golf carts, Scooby-Doo vans, MTLBs, an increasing number of older BTRs equipped only with heavy machine guns. That's very different from the MBT and BMP heavy columns Russia started the Battle of Avdiivka with at the end of 2023. Next up is the BRDM-2. Bulgaria announced the delivery of an unknown number of BRDM-2s to Ukraine, along with a lot of older systems that will be mentioned later. The BRDM-2 has been in Ukrainian service throughout the war and before, providing 14.5mm heavy machine gun fire in a small arms-resistant package. This has been seen in use with some of Ukraine's 150 series brigades that are supposed to enter service in 2024, as mentioned with the AMX-10RC. While suboptimal, these vehicles can put out a lot of hurt on a lot of different Russian contexts that did not exist in 2023. Next up is the Scimitar. The United Kingdom announced delivering 23 Scimitar CRVT variants in 2023, but none of them have been seen in training, issued to brigades, in combat, or in losses. Their number is almost inconsequential, but Lithuania announced that they would be delivering an unknown number of their CRVTs in 2024, which should boost the number of autocannon-equipped recce vehicles to provide long-range precision fire support. The UK had a large number of these retired in 23, but they then adopted to destroy them rather than equip the Ukrainians with the vehicle. While certainly suboptimal in areas of protection, rate of fire, suppression capability, and others, it provides a necessary function that the Ukrainian military needs filled in order to cover their large fleet of lightly armed APCs, MRAPs, and IFVs. Speaking of those APCs, a new addition to the Ukrainian front is the M117 ASV Guardian. The American aid flows further as what was once 250 M117 ASV Guardians raised to over 400. This vehicle is an improvement on the old Commando Light AFV concept that was in bidding to replace the Humvee before Hurricane Katrina obliterated its production facilities. The M117 for the United States military is used exclusively as a military police vehicle, but with a dismount capacity of 8 up armor packages to resist up to 14.5 fire, and a manned turret firing a 12.7mm heavy machine gun and 40mm automatic grenade launcher, the M117 provides Ukraine's motorized infantry so much more than what most of their MRAPs and IMVs in service can provide. This, at its simplest, provides an alternative to the BRDM-2 that sacrifices some anti-armor potential for increased protection, infantry suppression, and troop transport capability along with mine resistance. When looking at Ukraine, what it has been able to get out of Humvees in those raids and the constant use of MRAPs as NBCs, an improvement in capability. They've already been seen with the 154th, and while deliveries may be slow, 400 vehicles would go a long way into limiting the need for using civilian vehicles for transportation and logistics. The M113 has been around for a while in Ukraine. The United States of America have supplied over 1,000 variants directly, and with 900 M113 direct variants and 300 hospital variants also being sent in addition. Most of these have continued excellent service, with only about 150 being lost. The M113 and its variants from other countries continues to be a workhorse for troop transportation and logistics in Ukrainian service, as well as the occasional aggressive use of it in the assault role. It's fuzzy how many were sent in 2024 total, but the number is more than enough to replace Ukrainian losses. Canada also supplied 29 decommissioned hulls for spare parts to help run the existing fleet. With better protection than the MTLB, MRAPs, and IMVs, with better mine survivability than BMPs, the M113 has a knack for continuing service as a workhorse in high-intensity conflict despite its aluminum box nature. Other national variants and deliveries have also augmented this fleet to reach an appreciable impact on Ukraine's defense, with around 37 brigades having the M113 in service. It lacks the offensive capabilities required for optimal assaults, and it being pushed into that role should be kept rare, but the delivery of this vehicle is essential. It is simply that other better armed vehicles must be supplied to fill Ukraine's heavy firepower needs. Italy delivered a little over 10 of their modified M113s in the form of the VCC-2 in the summer of 2024. It's a very small amount that will hopefully grow, but if every European state regularly contributed a small amount of vehicles, it would be adding up. The vehicle should be better protected than the M113A1 variant, so it should be on par with other M113 variants being sent by the United States and other countries. An undisclosed number of Puma 6x6 wheeled APCs were delivered to Ukraine before May of 2024, evidenced only by one being visually confirmed lost. Not particularly well armed or armored, this Italian Puma would fit in with high mobility units trying to redeploy infantry, evacuate wounded, resupply positions, etc. There's a grand total of 250 of the 6x6 vehicles available to be sent, as well as an additional 330 in a 4x4 configuration. This vehicle seems to fit a similar niche to the Slovenian Valuk that had 20 delivered in 2023. In 2024, Slovenia delivered 26 BOV APCs, which are more akin to an infantry mobility vehicle, and were delivered alongside 3 more M-80A IFVs. The number of IFVs are so low it was not seen worth mentioning earlier, and 12 total M-80As have been lost, so the 3 new additions don't even cover a major percentage of the meager losses. The BOV, however, has sustained a loss in Kursk, where they were deployed using their high on-road speed. This was reported in late August by ArmyRecognition.com and does not show up in the Oryx database as of mid-October. The Army Recognition also reports 20 of the 26 were armed with 12.7 mm machine guns, while 6 were equipped with 20 mm autocannons, which would be a pretty potent gun to have among the lighter four-wheeled vehicles. This is Army Recognition, however, and the reporting can be a bit confused, as the article also seems to just suggest that all Slovenian donated kit was used in Kursk, despite the fact that the M-55S tanks have been with the 5th Armored, which is training in Ukraine and not currently deployed. Early in 2024, May to be precise, the Netherlands claimed additional YPR-765s would be supplied to Ukraine, but now with remote weapon stations for increased crew survivability. Many were hoping additional YPR-765 PRI variants would be delivered. A YPR-765 equipped with a one-man turret 25mm Bushmaster, identical to the one used on the Bradley. Alas, neither have seemed to surface in Ukraine throughout 2024 reports of pledges, deliveries, or in service. One PRI was privately purchased and has been in Ukrainian use since 2023, but remains alone. The PRI is a very outdated system. Why it is still being held onto is a mystery, but it would fit in well, especially with the 3rd Assault Brigade, who have been using the 12.7mm machine gun armed variants with exposed gunners as assault vehicles to suppress entrenched enemies and support assault teams as part of their go-to tactic for the length of the war. Being able to use an autocannon instead of a heavy machine gun would be a world of difference in giving these vehicles breathing room for increased survivability. Germany has a fleet of retired APCs that Ukraine was supposed to begin domestic production and support of this year, the Fuchs APC, or Fox. Germany has 400 of these vehicles, and recent Bundeswehr announcement suggested that the 400 MRAPs they intend to deliver in Ukraine by December will be these APCs. Not earth-shattering anyway, they will fit in with the same rules that the Ukrainians found for their French VAB. An APC for moving troops around, evacuating wounded, bringing in more ammunition. 400 vehicles, however, is an impressive amount and would go a long way to limiting Ukrainian reliance on unarmored vehicles within drone range. If every Fuchs from German storage reaches Ukraine, then there will be an amount of these vehicles with remote weapon stations with 12.7 heavy machine guns, which might give them some suppressive capabilities for more aggressive uses. This has not been done yet with Western supplied systems, but Ukraine has had a tendency to mount their combat modules on any hull that they have at their disposal. A Fuchs has integration with unmanned turrets. A BM7 combat module with its 30mm autocannon, 30mm grenade launcher, 7.62 coaxial machine gun, and ATGMs would functionally be very similar to the BTR-4s Ukraine has committed to the use of throughout the war. That is a very hopeful hypothetical, and they will likely refrain from any seriously aggressive maneuvers, which is still incredibly useful for Ukraine given the vehicle's resistance to mines and decent protection. Bulgaria seems to be a major contributor in quantity, albeit not quality, armored vehicles for Ukrainian service in 2024 relative to its size and economy. Oryx cites 110 BTR-60 PBs, an unspecified number of BTR-50s, as well as the aforementioned unspecified number of BRDM-2s. Likely anything remaining of their Soviet-era stockpile, even vehicles converted for civilian use like this BTR-60, whose Bulgarian civilian origin is hinted at by the glass window on the side rear of the hull. The conspicuous turret on top is the Ukrainian BM7 combat module. That would give this depressingly unarmored APC a 30mm autocannon, 30mm automatic grenade launcher, a 7.62 machine gun, and 4 anti-tank guided missiles. The BTR-50 was seen in Russian use sparingly, as it is a very old and thus rare system, but nonetheless it joined the assault on Avdiivka. Ukraine has proposed modernization efforts for the BTR-50, but like many of their modernization projects, it is unlikely we will see actually any of them in any form of production. It should be noted the modernization for the BTR-60 was codified into the Ukrainian army this year, so they may have plans of expanding production of that vehicle. But the modernization really cuts everything off of the vehicle besides the bottom 5%, and it's extensive enough that in the context where BMP-1s are not getting turret swaps with the BM-7 combat module, is unlikely the BTR-60M will reach meaningful production numbers to make use of the Bulgarian BTR-60 PBs, especially since it's filling the same niche as the BTR-4 that is already in production. The BRDM-2 has been in continued Ukrainian service, as previously mentioned in the last video, where we saw training use in the 150th and 154th Mechanized Brigades. They might see limited modernization or modification before being sent to combat, but that would be a decision at the local unit level. This is all undermined by the fact that in late September, Bulgaria halted shipments and demanded NATO cover transportation costs. Mind you, this was equipment promised in early 2024, and this issue is only coming up now. Sweden, at the beginning of 2024, declared their entire stock of PBV 302s were to be delivered to Ukraine, which would include over 200 units of their amphibious APC that is frontally resistant to 23mm AP and fires from a 20mm clip-fed cannon. We also know Sweden, soon after the announcement of their delivery, announced that these vehicles would be equipped with camouflage, hopefully meaning they are planning on producing thermal camouflage for the old APC contemporary of the BMP-1 in order to improve the survivability of the vehicle. In the first week of October, a month before their declared delivery, 70 of the 200 APCs were being seen transported by rail through Chechnya. The heavy APC is an improvement on any uses of the M113 or YPR-765 in frontline service as an assault role vehicle, and serves as a system actually capable of keeping itself protected from lightly armored enemy vehicles, and is also a bit more potent at range against infantry, especially entrenched infantry. Sweden has made no plans on further expanding their original delivery of CV9040C IFVs, and the joint Scandinavian and Dutch negotiations on supplying Ukraine with CV9035NLs have failed to yield any evidence of progress in 2024, despite the money put into the project for 35 systems, which is not even half a brigade's worth of IFVs. Lithuania announced that an unspecified number of Patria APCs would be delivered to Ukraine. The KTO Rosomak in Ukrainian service is an upgun derivative of the Patria and has seen service for over a year with minimum losses despite operating a fleet in the low hundreds. The APC sits in the same protection tier as Strikers and LAVs, but unlike the other two, does not share parts with those APCs, only sharing parts with the Rosomak. As a fairly modern vehicle, Lithuania really doesn't have all that many to donate, and what small numbers will be sent is unknown. In the same package of decommissioned LAV 2.0 Coyotes, Ukraine was given up to 89 LAV 6.0 ASCVs, which have been seeing Ukrainian service prior in very small numbers as a fairly heavy-wheeled APC. It sits in the same place as American Strikers, as again they are related, but the ASCV is quite a bit larger with more capacity. The quantity would be a nice boost to the APC fleet, of which Ukraine always needs more, but part of that excessive need is derived from the shortage of IFVs in Ukrainian service. The LAV 6.0 ASCV is not an IFV, nor is it in any good position to be used or even modified for one in the assaulting role. We've covered a portion of ground combat vehicles Ukraine is or was expected to receive in 2024, but not all of them. Many are continuations on existing deliveries, and when one delivery ends and another begins is hard to determine. But we do know, for example, many more French VABs will be sent to Ukraine. Specifically, at least the 120 plus in service with the 155th Mechanized. The large sum of SPGs have not been included on the list, but they are certainly important. The 75 plus Caesars, 12 plus PZH 2000s, 4 Boxer RCHs. I said we'd come back around to it. So instead of Boxer IFVs or APCs, Germany will be delivering 155mm self-propelled gun versions of the Boxer. You also have initiatives like the Danish procurement of Ukrainian systems by directly commissioning the production of at least 4 to 18 Bodana 4s. A number of DITA Czech howitzers were also purchased, and a large sum of other howitzers being delivered. The focus on the other systems were more to look at places where Ukraine is suffering from shortages of, and how systems from other roles are being pushed from those roles into services outside their capability, driving up the need for those systems and the consumption of those systems.